One day at a time.
It's that real this time around. Get on your knees. This is the point of no return. I can never go back. Life without parole, upstate, shackled and trapped. Living in the hole, looking at the world through a crack. But fuck that, I'd rather shoot it out and get clapped. I've gone too far, there ain't no coming back for me. Auschwitz gas chamber full of Zyklon B.
Welcome, ladies and gents, to another episode of Orwellian Optics, a podcast by Allio Capital. I'm your host, Joseph Gradante. I'm here with my co-host, AJ and Tyler. Introduce yourselves, gentlemen.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back. We got another exciting one for you. We got a guest here, unique. We have Chris out on his honeymoon this week, so congrats to him. But we're joined here with Tyler, our chief risk officer. Tyler, how you doing today, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, you guys.
Oh, thrilled to have you. It's going to be a good one today. I think the first thing that comes to mind right off the bat, we got the VP debate in the books now. Battle of, you can't really call them heavyweights, but you can certainly, say that it was entertaining. And I think we all got a really good look at the two VP candidates. And really, I think, the substance of that debate was really impressive. It was a refreshing kind of take for me personally to be able to watch a debate without sweating because of like all the anxiety that was just kind of coming through from some of the other ones. But, for me, the thing that stood out the most was Vance. He made a really solid case for 2028 run, regardless of how this election goes. He was articulate, he was measured, he was calm, he was collected, he was making points, he was, kind of playing tennis back with the moderators, batting things back at them and really, I think played to the audience in a way that led itself to, presenting himself in a really positive light. So I don't know what you guys thought, but like that was a big step in the Republican Party and even more so just for like, the ability to like have a candidate who's not 80 years old who can like stand up in front of a camera and like articulate himself.
Yeah, it's been a long time, I think, since we've seen a candidate who's so cool, calm, and collected under pressure. But even more importantly, who offers a path, forward for our country, a future, right? Because neither ticket, I think, if you look at, in 2016, you had Pence and Trump, and then you had Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. And then in 2020, it's Biden, Harris, and, Trump and Pence again. And so it's been a while since we've had this young, articulate. I think Bill Clinton was the last person that we had that was really kind of this young up and comer, on the presidential stage who really showed the capability to like lead our country. And in the case of Vance, yeah, right. He's on the GOP side. But you don't get, the hyperbolic rhetoric with him. He really, what I liked on the stage between the two candidates is the level of respect that they showed for each other. Because, if this country is going to get back to the success that we've had in years past, it's going to come, through our strengths. And our strength is debate and discourse, right? And it's the exchange of ideas, right? Because nobody has all the answers. But when people come together and they hash out, different ideas, they realize, hey, this guy, they might like something the other guy has to say in a certain area of that policy discussion that's a little bit stronger, right? And then they might be a little stronger in a different area of that policy discussion. And there were a few times when him and Waltz, had that exchange, and it's been such a long time. I think, I want to say the last time I remember it being, I don't want to say cordial, but at least, show that level of potential was, back when you had Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton, not to age myself here, even when you had like Bush and Kerry, right? It was just kind of debauchery there in the sense that, you had these two old establishment skull and bones figures just having a conversation. So even before the Trump years, there wasn't really much there that gave you hope for the future. And so, I think Vance is kind of that Kennedy-esque, figure, but on the other side. And Tyler, what do you think of the debate?
I thought that was the debate that Americans were waiting for. I mean, surprisingly, it was very polite. It was civil. I kind of agree with AJ that I think Vance did a lot in one night to lock down the 2028 nomination. He really was very sharp, very well spoken. I also enjoy that there was plenty of talk about policy in there and not just throwing barbs at one another. I think that was refreshing for a lot of people. One thing that I really find interesting about Vance in particular and kind of how our political system is changing is how Vance is fairly pro-union. And typically unions have always been a solidly liberal voting bloc, but that's kind of starting to change, interestingly enough. The Teamsters the other day polled their internal members, and I think it was something like 60 or 62% self-reported that they'd be voting for Trump. So I think this election is very interesting in a lot of ways. I think you're starting to see kind of a shakeup of, the typical left versus right dynamic doesn't exist the way that it did when we were kids or when our parents were, our age. So it's been interesting to watch.
No, I was just going to say on that note, Tyler, on the globalization, right, conversation, I think one of the things here that's and why, right, I think the union members support him is he pointed out that like having stuff made in countries that don't have our best interests at heart, how flawed that is. And how, I remember back when the whole globalization debate was taking place, I mentioned the Bush Senior and Clinton debates, and Ross Perot was in the middle of that, the only one making sense, right? If we're not producing things, it doesn't matter, right? And so, we have the ability and the natural resources to create everything here, but our country is hollowed out. And so the net effect on everyone is negative because it's leading to a decline in our living standards, right? I mean, right now, our system is at a point where, there's really only two options, right? And that's to default on the debt or to print money and inflate our way out of it. And so the fact that he recognizes that, right, because it was, if we're being honest, it was the Republican Party that pushed globalization, right? Open borders started with Ronald Reagan, as great of a president as I think he was. It started with him, and it was really Bush Senior that was carrying the NAFTA flag, and then Bill Clinton, brought the policy home and closed the deal. But Democrats and Republicans were both, on that particular debate with Ross Perot in the middle. But they both agreed on that, right? And that's why Ross Perot had to become the independent, but the catalyst was the Republicans. And to see Vance, take it full circle and acknowledge these things and realize that we have to bring production back home. Yeah, I just think, that's why you're seeing the support from union members, because if you don't have, production at home and particularly if you don't have strong unions, right, you're not going to have, any middle class. And that's why there's pretty much none left as it is. And so I think it's a recipe for success, right? Low taxes, low regulation, but imposing tariffs on companies that do have stuff made overseas in foreign markets to incentivize them to build here at home. And I think, you see that coming out of the Conservative Policy Institute. And so I think that's where, Vance is getting that formula from.
Well, Joseph, I think it's important for a multitude of reasons, but, in particular, the national security aspect of this, obviously the economic piece of it, we need to have the production here to supply the jobs to build a robust middle class and provide the option for that American dream to exist. But even more than that, you go down this path that we've kind of been on since the start of the war in Ukraine, and we're shipping all these munitions, all these military hardware pieces over to Ukraine to support these guys, and there's nothing left home. Like we don't actually have the capability to replace a lot of the stuff that we're shipping over there because we've hollowed out the industrial base, and effectively minimal amount of this military hardware that would be required to defend the continental United States from an actual attack on our soil does not exist. Like we cannot go replace this stuff. We have to buy it. We have to import it. We have to find it from somewhere else. And, when you think back to the founding fathers and like the concept behind a union of 13 colonies and building a United States of America, like the entire point of the federal government was to provide for the common defense. And all these other things that it's kind of metastasized into over the last 200 some years, are really nice to have things. And that even that's debatable. But the one thing that it absolutely cannot shirk its duty with respect to providing for the common person is the national defense. It's the ability to defend our sovereignty from other actors, which obviously, like you said, do not have our best interests at heart. So that's the biggest piece to me. In addition to the economic side of it, it's just the national security element of this. Like the government's job is to protect us from those foreign actors. And, whether it's terrorism, whether it's, the Chinese, whether it's the Russians, whether we go, forward 50 years from now and it's someone else, like we need to be able to supply our military and provide an element of defense that currently I think is severely lacking. And that's a huge issue.
Yeah, I never, one thing that I never understood is why it's okay. We saw in the COVID crisis, the supply chain issues that we had with antibiotics. And I didn't understand, why it's okay for pharmaceutical companies to make stuff overseas and sell it to U.S. consumers, but yet U.S. consumers can't buy pharmaceuticals from overseas, right? And it's just getting back to this, this discussion of labor unions, right? Labor does not have the ability to move. Capital does. And so that's why, right? And so capital, right? They have bought our political class, right? They purchased our political class, right? These big multinational corporations. And so the political class no longer represents the interests of the people, right? Going back to Citizens United, it represents the interests of these big corporations. And so that's why, Kamala Harris doesn't want to impose tariffs, right? Because she is the candidate of the plutocracy, right? She's the candidate, of their best interest. And so on the other side with Donald Trump, he is truly trying to represent the interests of the people. But I think, as you pointed out a few weeks ago, AJ, with Donald Trump, he's just not a politician. And so when he walks into that presidential debate, David Muir on ABC, and he gets ambushed, he's not really equipped to really handle that environment. And having someone like Vance, I think, underneath him, as the future standard bearer of the party, right? It's a nice combination, because here's the fighter at the top, this guy who there's 2 assassination attempts, multiple impeachment attempts. They threw the entire judicial system out. And then here's his younger counterpart who can sit there and just play ping pong with policy. Yeah. And it was amazing. And, Tyler, what were your thoughts, overall, as far as the policies that I love how they were both cordial, but I think there was, I thought it was interesting how, Walsh, he thought the government could be a solution to everything. And, I was curious, I know you're a big libertarian. What were your thoughts on that?
I thought Walls was in a very difficult position in trying to defend the last 3.5 years. I think that his challenge that night was a lot more insurmountable than Vance's. Vance needed to go out there, speak eloquently, provide a vision of hope for the future, and I think he absolutely excelled at that. Walls, on the other hand, is in an unenviable position where he has to defend the last 3.5 years. And for most Americans, the last 3.5 years have been pretty ugly. I mean, everybody that goes to the grocery store right now and fills up one bag and it costs $80, experiences. So one point that Vance brought up that I really liked was about clean energy. And he had said something to the effect of, America produces the cleanest energy in the world, so why should we outsource this to other countries that may not? Let's produce more of it here. I thought that was a great plan, and I really hope that we get back to a point of energy independence in America.
And I'll say this too, from the perspective of being a leader in the industries that are going to define innovation in the 21st century, specifically AI, which is a core investment theme that a lot of folks are really passionate about right now. In order to build the type of AI applications, both in the commercial, educational, industrial, and national defense side, there is a tremendous amount of energy that needs to go into those things, both on the model training side and in the actual inference and generating the computing power to drive the outputs of all these different AI-based models. It's tremendously more energy intensive than the standard paradigm of, a standard data center or standard computing that we have kind of become familiar with in the 21st century with respect to the cloud services of, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, et cetera. So from that perspective, you've actually started to see a number of tech companies take some fairly aggressive measures to secure power, both in terms of turning on 3 Mile Island again, which I don't know if you guys have seen, but as well as I think it was Oracle that had a press release in the last couple of weeks that was saying something to the effect of they're designing a data center that's going to be powered by a modular nuclear reactor or a set of 3 miniature modular nuclear reactors. And it just highlights this criticality. Like, we need to be able to produce multiples of the amount of energy that we are currently producing. So handicapping ourselves in our ability to actually go out and source and provide this energy to our industry to remain competitive on the world stage in these key areas of innovation is going to be hugely detrimental to our ability to actually go out and compete and drive this innovation forward in the way that we all know needs to happen to enable us to actually provide the standard of living, for our population, for our citizens in the 21st century. It's really the highest order item on the agenda. So I'm glad that Vance brought that up in that way, because, to his point, us shipping out effectively everything that's quote unquote dirty to China doesn't even allow us to access that. We just get access to the raw, to the raw output of those processes, which doesn't even translate into our ability to access energy. We just have to buy, crappy stuff off of Alibaba and pretend we're happy about it. So, I mean, that to me was the biggest takeaway there. I was really kind of excited to hear that coming from a platform, because that's a core policy, I think, that is actually going to drive tremendous value creation for us.
We have to grow our way out of this. There is no scenario where the government can step in and tax and regulate our way out of this. I mean, the government right now only has essentially two options, right? And that's we're at 130% of GDP, right? In terms of our debt levels. So every time that has happened historically, every single reserve currency has defaulted. Every empire that's had a reserve currency, when they've crossed that threshold at some point thereafter, they have defaulted. There are a lot of vested interests that are going to try to prevent that and are going to perpetuate this system as long as they can. But as that continues to happen, the standard of living is going to decline. And because, right, the only other option is that they inflate, they keep printing money, and wages aren't likely to go up except for those that are the most highly skilled, right? And it's, those that are in AI, for the most part, tech, AI, other areas, the people that really are going to work around the AI infrastructure. At some point, AI is going to increase productivity, but at no time in the near future are the living standards going to be raised for the average American. And so, and this movie, it's played before, right? Like, this isn't Friday the 13th part 1. This isn't Friday the 13th part 2. This is Friday the 13th part, 5 or 6. What is it? Jason Lives part 6, right? So we've seen this before, right? We've seen how this plays out. And so this is the path that we're going down. And so you see these two completely contrasted different approaches. One is like, hey, the government's going to step in and they're going to continue to, attack this divide, right? And divide people, pit them against each other, whether it's on the basis of race, religion, socioeconomics, right? So they can maintain their control, right? In perpetuating a system that only benefits, those at the very top. And so on the other side, right, it's about, hey, let's bring production back home. Let's deregulate. Let's invest. Let's incentivize entrepreneurs, right? Let's invest in these both sectors, right, and individuals and groups that are right, that are going to provide the jobs of tomorrow, right? That's the only so when we're within 30 days of the election now, and that's essentially the two choices that people have. Now, I am very bearish on I'm bearish on just the prospects that they would allow Donald Trump to be elected at all. I do not think the international order is okay with the Donald Trump presidency. However, I will say this, based on what I saw in the debate, I do think Vance brings something to the ticket, a different way of doing things. And I don't know if he alone can do it, but I do think if there was no chance at them allowing Donald Trump to be elected, I do think there is a small chance that with Vance as his running mate, they might see a way that, that side could potentially save them, right? Save the system, right? In the sense that if both sides can come together, work together, incentivize production at home. But at the end of the day, I still don't think that's likely to happen. But I just think that, it's a different equation with him in there as opposed to if he wasn't there. what do you guys think about, that aspect of things? Do you think Donald Trump has a shot at getting elected? Do you think there's a chance? Or do you think that this election is essentially Harris's? Not because, I want to be clear, none of us, speaking to the audience, none of us here think that, when I ask that question, none of us here think that Harris could actually win the election. I mean, Donald Trump is going to win the election. What I'm asking the two of them is, do they think there's any chance that the oligarchy allows Donald Trump to actually move back into power with some of the things that he has said that he was going to do, going after, the deep state, the bureaucracies, putting RFK on the commission that's going to expose the Kennedy assassination, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you guys feel about that?
I was going to say, I think everybody's already tried to keep him away from power at this point. I mean, lawfare, trying to put him in jail, trying to levy him with huge fines, assassination attempts. I mean, it seems like everyone's already pulling a lot of levers to make sure that doesn't happen.
I mean, I'll say, I think to your point, Joseph, I kind of agree with you, but even more so, the outcome of this, whether it falls in Trump's favor or not, the prospect of having Vance on the ticket, I think really reinforces my hope for our ability to work together, like you said earlier, in a little bit more of a collaborative way going forward. I think having someone with his background and character in that role will hopefully enable a little bit more collaboration and a little bit less, I guess the way I'm kind of thinking about it is, it's really hard to negotiate eye to eye with someone when you both are pointing a gun at each other's face. And I'm hoping that this results in a little bit toned down of a discourse. You're it's just very much you saw that debate, you saw how they were respectful, you saw hey, here's something that we have common ground on, here's something that we disagree on. At least if you discuss things in that way, you're more likely to kind of find a little bit of empathy for the other side, because realistically, there's always an argument to be made that there is somewhere that you can find common ground. The question is, though, does this election lead us directly there, or do we have to kind of, take a little bit more circuitous of a route to get there? But at the end of the day, my view is really the most critical piece of this, like you've highlighted, Joseph, is the debt cycle. It's the fact that we are not going to be able to grow our way out of this unless we are enabled as a people to generate the kind of wealth and opportunity that our parents and grandparents had in a way that allows everybody to really seize that American dream. And that's going to be the level of productivity that we need to get the budget balanced and make sure that things are kind of operating in a normal way where we can start to tackle this debt and not have it just kind of ballooning over time in the background until it explodes like a nuclear bomb and just wrecks all of us. And that's, really the worst case scenario. It's an outcome that is not only akin to the kind of pain that we saw during the Great Depression, but probably an order of magnitude worse. Because, if the U.S. defaults, I mean, that basically reprices every financial asset that's pegged at the risk-free rate to, a level that's way lower. And that's going to be hugely problematic for every financial institution and every retiree, every corporation that deals with banks. The Fed's not going to be able to bail everyone out forever. They can print money during COVID. They can do it during, the great financial crisis in 2008. They can, plug these holes temporarily. But now we're at a point where, they try to do that again. There's a little bit of skepticism out there that can we really pay this off? Who knows? And that's a really bad outcome to be in, because that's where we open ourselves up to basically what I'll call financial attack. Some other country could kind of swoop in and provide a little bit more stability, in the currency markets and in the financial markets. And suddenly the US dollar is no longer the reserve currency. Suddenly the US Treasury isn't the risk-free asset. And that is massively disruptive. But, to kind of tie it back in there real quick, and then I'll pass it back to you guys. For me, I would love to just see some proactive policy solutions coming out of this. We walk the clock forward 30 days, the election happens, and then, we can get back to work. Optimistically, we take this respectful discourse that we saw in the VP debate, and we lean into that as a people, and we have a little bit more respect for each other. And, we tell the globalists to basically get bent. We're going to do things that are best for our people that are best for Americans. We're going to build policies that enable wealth creation and value creation and innovation that, basically disperse to the people who are creating the value and not up to the top to the oligarchy. And, that's how we get out of this, to me.
I was going to say, unfortunately, I think spending is the only true bipartisan issue left. I mean, and that's Republicans and Democrats, and nobody wants to stop the money train. Everybody keeps spending. You look at the government, and their only tool out of any given problem is to throw more money at it. I hope that Trump and Vance are sincere when they say they really want to minimize the size of government, reduce expenditures, waste. But up to this point in American politics, both sides of the aisle have been equally complicit in just mortgaging our future for a little bit more stability in the present. And I really hope at some point that changes. I just am really not keeping my fingers crossed that it will.
Well, I'll say this. I don't mind spending so much as long as we're growing, because I do think AI is going to increase productive capacity. And so if we are incentivizing innovation and we could dominate on that front. I think we've gone so far from what made us great to begin with, that it would take some time to get back there. But I think if we reverse course now and we, stop with this ridiculous cultural, woke ideology and focused on, teaching people, I read an interesting stat last weekend that 4 of 10 Gen Zers see the founders as villains. I mean, what? Like, the founders as villains? Like, these are the guys that are responsible for democracy existing in the world. I mean, they talk about democracy and the threat to democracy. The threat to democracy is somebody like Kamala Harris, who, not only was there, did she not, going into 2020, right? She did terrible in the primaries on the Democrat in the Democratic debates, right? She was polling last. I think she was at like 8%. So she going into those debates, she was a heavy favorite. She ended up, somewhere near the bottom, if not last. And so they snuck her in there behind Biden. And then after Biden wins the Democratic primary, he drops out. So she didn't even get the traditional superdelegates. So threat to democracy, putting this woman in power, right? Like, I mean, and yet, but they see the founders as villains, but these are the people that would support. But our culture has gone so, we're on the Titanic at this point, right? And it's just, you're rearranging chairs on the Titanic. Unless we change course and we go back to doing what we did in the 60s, 70s, 80s, up until the 90s. I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, and I mean, I couldn't think of any greater honor than being an American, right? Being born in America, you had a chance to be president. I mean, I legitimately, and there's no reason why. I mean, JD Vance, look at his story. I mean, my story growing up is not too dissimilar to his, in that I was mostly raised by my grandmother, and he's on the vice presidential ticket. Here's a guy that, I think I believe he's 2 years younger than me. We might even be the same exact age. So, and you see where he's at, because it was possible. Anybody can get there, and everybody believed that. And if we were to start going back to that, and that's what I mean, where it starts with working together. However, I have zero hope if Kamala Harris is elected. The left has been pursuing a one-party system for a while. I mean, if you look at she's talked about getting rid of the filibuster, right? There's a reason why, 51% is not allowed to produce policy. There's a reason why you need a supermajority in this country, right? Is because you want a mandate, right? You want consensus, right? You don't want tyranny. You don't want mob rule. And so, but unfortunately, I do think that, like, she is the candidate of the establishment. And if she wins, they are going to keep maneuvering until they get complete control of the government. I mean, anything that they don't control, they want control of. We've heard their opinions on the Supreme Court. So to me, unless Trump and Vance, this is the last election. This is the last real American election, because they're going to do everything possible to expand power and preserve that power once they expand it so that it never goes back the other way. I mean, so when you look at Chuck Schumer, a guy like that lead the Democrats in the Senate, and you look at the fact that they got Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, the two moderates, they got them out of there. Now, I do think that there's a small chance, right, that with Vance on the ticket, that if Trump were to win fair and square, but I just think it's a very low chance. To be clear, I don't want to say there's no chance. Again, Trump will win the election hands down. There's zero chance that Kamala Harris actually wins. But when you look at just recently in Arizona, the officials there came out and said, oh, we actually gave out 218,000, voting ballots to illegal migrants, and it was a coding error. But you know how easy as a group here running the tech company, it is really easy to go in and make a change to code. It is so easy for them to cheat in the elections between the mail-in votes and, just making changes to the code. I mean, and there's nobody to really check that. Only in the Republican states is there, any vehicle to check that. In Georgia, the Democrats are suing the Republicans in power because they want every vote counted by hand. Why would they be suing? Because the votes are going to be counted. They're suing over the fact they don't want transparency, right? They want illegals to vote and they want a one-party system. That's why they started flying migrants into all these swing states. And I think Vance is kind of like a similar figure in the sense that I think he would keep the controls on Trump enough where he wouldn't do anything so drastic to kind of, to send things into disarray and chaos. And I think if they feel they can manage him a little bit, they're more likely to put him in power. I just still think I'll put that at like 10%. Again, 100% chance he wins the election, a 10% chance they allow that outcome to come to fruition. It would just have to be by such an overwhelming margin where they feel like challenging that would do more damage to the prospects of them maintaining control, right, than not doing that, right? In other words, it's obvious that he won, and if they try to give it to Harris and then people don't trust in the system anymore, it's more likely to lead to rebellion and chaos. And so if that is the narrative, that is the only case where I see them allowing Donald Trump to win the election. But why, I wanted to hash that out so much is because, at Allio, I mean, right, this is what we're focused on as a company. And it's so important that people are building portfolios that are dynamic. And, AJ, I think you could speak to a little bit of what it means for a portfolio to be dynamic and why it is that, these levers, the debt cycle, external conflict, internal conflict, why they need to be so closely paid attention to when it comes to portfolio construction and the right mix of asset classes.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you talk about this all the time, Joseph. Like, history doesn't just start in 1920. You go back and you look at a finance textbook and for better or worse, most of the time they're like, oh yeah, the S&P returns 10% nominally on average every year. Just look at the time period from 1920 to, 2020. And, unfortunately, you're basically sampling like the most productive period in the history of the world, in the most productive country that won basically 2 world wars and existed as the sole industrial power for a giant chunk of that time because of the devastation enacted by those previous 2 wars. So looking forward into the 21st century, there's no guarantee that the same assumptions that are used as the building blocks of modern portfolio theory persist and are able to be relied upon by the average investor over the next 100 years, the same way that they were able to be relied upon over the previous 100 years. And what that means is you have to think critically from the perspective of what are the types of things that could provide a black swan type event or some sort of economic or political or geopolitical shock. Are they wars, famines, crises, supply chain disruptions, pandemics, whatever it is? There are a whole bunch of things that are uniquely detrimental and destructive of wealth if your asset allocation is not set up the right way. And so the element of this that I think we're really focused on as a company and really philosophically is how do you build portfolios in a way that maximizes your chance of being successful over a range of different economic and geopolitical outcomes, because we can't know today what the future 100 years looks like, other than we know it's going to be different than the last 100 years. What that means is, you have to have an ability to kind of pay attention and read between the lines with respect to macroeconomic policy, fiscal policy, geopolitical risk, and look out and say, what does this mean for markets? What does this mean for the macro environment? What does this mean for risk assets? And how do I build and modify my portfolio over time to make sure that it's resilient to these economic shocks while still being able to capture some of the upside potential of the fact that, there is still productive capacity out there. Earnings, generally at the US level, internationally in some areas are still growing. People are still innovating and creating value. It's just a question of where is it? How do I go get it? And how do I incorporate that into my total asset allocation that doesn't leave me overexposed? So, you talk to a lot of retail investors and they're like, you ask them, what's in your portfolio? And they're like, oh, I'm well diversified. I have Apple, Tesla, Google, Facebook, and Nvidia. And I'm like, okay, well, I wouldn't call that diversified, but you certainly have a lot of names in there with a correlation approaching 1, which isn't necessarily healthy. So, what we're trying to do is say, take a top-down macro approach. It's not just what stocks should you buy, it's what assets should you own, what asset classes, geographies, industries, and sectors, and how do you incorporate them into a portfolio in a way that allows you to be both diversified to protect against some of the risk factors, but also opportunistic in terms of an ability to capitalize on some of the potentially positive events that could come around, and provide an impetus for you to gain wealth and accrue wealth. So really that's kind of the core concept. You have to be able to, think for yourself, think critically, and put together a portfolio that suits your risk tolerances, your goals, your objectives in a way that's both, levered to the upside, but defensive against some of the downside risks. And really, that's what we try to teach and preach here at Allio. And I think that's what makes our platform so powerful. And, that's what, frankly gets me out of bed. And for you guys, your guys' sake, I know we have a little bit of different view in terms of like, hey, you like this asset, I like this asset. But at the end of the day, it's really, when you take that top-down macro approach, everybody's going to come up with a slightly different conclusion, but it's really about building a process and staying true to that process and making sure that, the way that you're thinking about things is logically consistent and you stick to that process over time.
Yeah. I think, that's really, like you said, people have different opinions, and that's why we really incorporate it in the term is UX, right? For user experience, but in our case, it's client experience. And so if that's the case, right, you can curate your own portfolio, but you're doing so in a way that you're learning in the process of how to set up a portfolio with that optimal matrix, if you will, of different exposures, so that, you can still have your level of customization, right? But you can still have these bumper lanes to keep you within a certain framework, to set you up for success. And if not, you turn to the Allio team here, guys like Tyler and AJ, these two CFAs, these two brilliant men, and we got Adam Damko and Christopher Morgan, and all these great minds on the team, and so. And look, personally, I think that's how people should do it, right? You should allow the professionals to do it for you. But I also think it's cool that we live in this era of fintech, right? Where people, people do have their opinions, and, as long as they can do it in a way where they're learning, I'm okay with that. So whether you want to customize it on your own or you just want to have a team of professionals do it for you, Allio allows you to do both of those. We're taking people onto the beta list now. If you go to alliocapital.com, you can check us out. And with that, folks, this has been another episode of Orwellian Optics by Allio Capital. Again, that's alliocapital.com. Please, don't forget to subscribe and like, and don't forget to look for us on wherever you get your podcast, on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. And with that, it's been another episode. Peace, love. Talk to you next time.
Thanks, folks. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.